Welcome to another episode of Treasure Corals. The only thing I'm more passionate about than refractometers is magnet cleaners. And today we have a dirty glass and a full array of top-of-the-line magnet cleaners that you probably will find in your own cupboard. And we will put all of them to use on this glass. So let's dive right in. So over the years, I've amassed a great number of magnet cleaners, ranging from this flipper and this brand new Waterbox unit to this old school Mag-Float. This was the one to get many years back, and even this TUNZE one. So I have different sizes, we have different thickness of glass. This one is 5/8 behind me, so we can probably start with that one. But we can also use the bigger units on thicker glass. I have 3/4 inch on my other Waterbox system, and I have thinner glass in some of my farm aquariums. So I'm really excited to try it out on this system. This hasn't been cleaned in probably 5-6 days. So I think this just gives you what you will run into in the field. So let's take all of these cleaners for a spin and see how they perform in action. I think it would be only appropriate to start with the Waterbox magnet. So this is something that I got for this aquarium here, which is also Waterbox. There's two parts here. One of them is all wooden, so it's really well crafted. It's got a premium feel to it, and obviously there's some felt. And then the other part, this is a lighter part, probably the biggest magnet is in the handle. So this one is going to go in the water. So we'll put it here, and I guess we'll start by just running it through. And you can see it's so strong that I'm even getting a little bit of a shake to the aquarium. It might be even too strong for 5/8. I'd say it's 3/4 is probably where it's really gonna shine. But here you can see the streak, almost no lines, and probably just a couple of runs and we should be fine. But before we're gonna go with that, let's take a look at the old school cleaner, the Mag-Float. This is the second one that I'm going to take a look at. This one has been with me for probably 15 years or so. I even had it on my freshwater before. It's got the magnet, it's got a blade attachment. This is kind of the old school way of doing it. Yes, there is some rust on this thing. I need to clean it at some point, but I think for the sake of this experiment, we can still put it in. And let's take a quick look. Orient it this way and then run it like this. You can also see that it jumps, and you can also see that it doesn't do as good of a job as the Waterbox. So there's a lot more streaking here. So this is just a single run. Obviously it's going to be completely different when we go back and forth, but I want to experiment with this first. Next we have the flipper float, and this guy is pretty awesome because it floats. I think the first version didn't. Also, it's a little bit nicer handle, and it's super thin, so it's very small profile inside of the aquarium. I think it's less than the Waterbox or the Mag-Float, so if you have tight crevices, tight spaces, you can really fit it in between your coral or your rock and the glass. So we're gonna take this guy in and gently go in and once again run it through. And you can see it's narrower than your Waterbox. It's not, but it's really clean. So this particular line, there's nothing here. There's not a single streak. And it also kind of staggers and jumps. And then the final one that I'm going to try on this particular aquarium is this TUNZE one. I know that they have come out with a newer one. This is the one that I do have. So it's very narrow and it's a small profile as well. And if we take this guy in, put it inside, well, here we go. We're running it. It also does this jump, and look at this guy. So it's probably the widest, or as wide as the Waterbox, but it does a pretty clean job. So now that I have these 4, because I think these are the most important ones for us to try out, I will actually start moving it around the tank, each one of them, and talk about the experience. So I guess we'll go in the same order that we've introduced them. So starting with the Waterbox, this is definitely the tightest or strongest hold of them. It takes a while to go, like it takes a little bit of an effort to go back and forth. And we'll try it on the other tank, because the other tank is wider glass. But here you can see it definitely gets the job done. I don't see anything left over. I don't need to pass it through. Now, another thing that I always worry about is the top of the aquarium, because this is where I want to make sure that there's no splashing. So we'll experiment a little bit on that front as well. So this is me cleaning it at the top, and you can see it's actually, there's a little bit of splash when I go back, so I have to clean it up. But when I was going forward, I do not. So I have to be careful not going too fast, going back and forward. But then the splashing is not too bad. Okay, so next let's take a look at the Mag-Float. This one glides faster, but it also requires me going over the same spot a little bit more. So, and we will check it out on harder surfaces, or maybe some coralline if I can find some, but here you can see that it leaves a little bit of a streak. Now let's take a look at the top, and here I can go much faster and it doesn't splash. Before we're going to take a look at the other two, this is what I always do to my starfish here. Just press it down and see, yeah, can never resist. All right, starting with the with the flipper float. So here I'm running it through a couple of runs. You can see that it leaves a little bit of a streak, but a couple of more and it's gone. Now, one thing that I do like about it is how smooth it glides. So the smoothness on this thickness of glass is very nice. So let's experiment with the spill, or the spill of the water, and it's not too bad. So I think the smoothness relates to how much spill you will get, and in here I probably get a little bit less spill. And then finally, let's take a look at the TUNZE. So the biggest issue with the TUNZE, at least with this version, which is not on the newer ones, which I don't have, is that if this thing detaches, this part is going to go, the inside is going to go down and it doesn't float. So that's a problem. All the other ones float, which is nice. So let's take a look. And it does clean quite nice. And now let's take a look at the spilling. So I'm going at the top surface, so it's not too bad. But there is definitely this jumpingness here. So now I'm worried about this little spot here. So let's take a look at who's going to be able to do the job. So the flipper cannot get this done. Let's take a look at the Waterbox one. So slowly getting it here, and you can see that there's a little bit of improvement, but not much, so it doesn't get quite in. So it's one of those things that I find that probably it's unevenness in the glass, but the magnets cannot get it. Let's take a look at the TUNZE. TUNZE probably gets the better job done, so you can see running it a few times, it's pretty clean, so I'm gonna say that it can do the job. But I'll also use this Mag-Float one and see if it can handle it. And you can see, yes, so the Mag-Float really gets all of it done. So that same thing you would expect for the coralline algae as well. So having the TUNZE or the Mag-Float, I think they will handle those stubborn spots better than the flipper or the Waterbox. So let's now use all four, and I'm gonna just get the job done. So now let's try the thick glass. So this is 3/4 inch on my Waterbox 190.5 model. It's Pro Edition. And here, this is the big flipper. This is the Flipper Max. I'm also going to use the same TUNZE that we use on the other tank. Let's see how good it does on this one. We have the Waterbox, which I think is going to be more appropriate for this aquarium. And look at just the combination. I think it adds to the whole premium feel of the Waterbox. And you finally have the Mag-Float. This is for maybe the tougher algae. So once again, I'm going to try and experiment with both just the glide, the feel for it, also how easy it is to get to the bottom, the spill, and let's take it for a spin. So let's start with the Waterbox. So Waterbox, we run it, so you can see it's a lot smoother on this aquarium. So like I said before, I think this is probably what I would consider using on this aquarium instead of the thinner one. So if you have a 3/4 inch, I think this, although it's very expensive, this feels very, very nice. So I like the glide on this one, and the flipper does do quite well on this one as well. But you can see that it maybe leaves a little bit more. And here is actually a few cool places. So I have some stubborn algae here that we'll see who will be able to get through this. Now we've got the TUNZE one, which glides very well, doesn't really leave anything. So it's a cool one. And finally the Mag-Float. I don't think I'd be using it on this aquarium, but it actually does get the job done quite well. Next, let's take a look at the spill. So if I'm going at the surface, you see I can go actually a lot faster on here with the Waterbox, and I'm not spilling anything. So like I said, it's really how jagged the movement is. I think the same is going to apply to the flipper. You can see the flipper doesn't go too bad on this one. This is a giant one. Sorry. Finally, let's take a look at the TUNZE. TUNZE does feel a little bit jagged here, but no spill. And I don't know, Mag-Float, probably the easiest of them. You can also see that there's a little bit of a tough algae over here. So let's see who can, or actually there's just some calcium deposit. So see the Mag-Float is actually gets this done very, very nicely, but it's not super even. And like I said, this is probably If I fine tune the blade or get the newer blade, I'm probably going to be a little bit better. The TUNZE does get the job done as well, but it takes a few passes. We've got the Waterbox over here, and I don't think it will do anything to the calcification here, so you can see, because it's plastic. And well, flipper might actually get this done, but you can see that it's also not doing a very good job of getting rid of that tough algae, so sorry, calcium deposit. So like I said, I think the TUNZE is the one that will get it done a little bit easier. But also notice that the TUNZE now exhibits the same issue that I've had before, where this blue plastic starts to come off a little bit. So I have to actually lift it up and readjust and bring it back in for it to not come out. And I'm curious if they fixed it in the newer edition. Now let's take a look at the tough algae over here. So I think the TUNZE will take care of it eventually, but also it's not really getting at it, so that's a little bit annoying. I don't think the flipper will be able to do anything about this guy either. So that algae is still here. Well, I can try Waterbox, but I don't think anything will happen here when it comes to this. Maybe if I use the felt part, but even that doesn't quite go in, so this is still around. But the trusty Mag-Float, just a couple of passes and it's gone. So you can see that's actually pretty cool. So, and we can also clean up the top over here. Finally, let's take a look at the bottom, how easy it is to handle the bottom of the aquarium. And here we've got Mag-Float, which I think does an excellent job. Really clean. The Waterbox gets over here quite nicely as well. But I do experience even here a little bit of shaking of the aquarium, which I don't think I like too much. So you have to be careful. Flipper. Once again, also that same kind of jaggedness, so the aquarium shaking a little bit. I mean, those are strong magnets, so this is what you get. And I think if, for example, I use this tissue here, then I'm actually running it very easily, and there is an easy glide. So basically, that could be a little hack. Let's try the same thing on a Waterbox. And you can see now the aquarium doesn't shake. So if you're experiencing this, you can use a tissue or maybe a cleaning cloth, and this way you're also cleaning the front of the glass as well. So just some of the things you can try. Finally, let's take a look at the TUNZE ones. And you can see it also gets the job done quite nicely. But again, you have that stubborn green algae, and the only one that I think really is going to take care of it is this Mag-Float. And one thing that you also have to be very careful is getting the sand stuck in between all of these magnets, because if it does get stuck, it'll scratch your glass. But I guess that's something that has happened to me a few times already, and I swear I didn't deliberately do it. I think I'm very careful about it, and I actually have scratched the glass even in the bare bottom tank. So I'm actually not sure that it's always the sand that will do it. Maybe it's a small snail or something else. Never keep your magnets inside of the water long term either, because that will help. So these are the jumbo magnets, and you will talk about the overall final thoughts towards the end of the video, but now you've experienced the thick glass. So shall we maybe take a look at the small or thin glass next? So on this glass, which is about 6 millimeters in thickness, so pretty thin, I have the old Mag-Float. This one doesn't have any blade on it. I have the new flipper float. I have the TUNZE, the tiny one. I have the tiny flipper float, and I have the Waterbox. So here, just very quickly, let's take a look at what's going on. So the Mag-Float, as you can see, still does the job quite well. The flipper is pretty awesome. It's a little bit on the narrow side, but I find that even just 1 or 2 passes gives me the the clean line. If you really need to get into small spaces, you can use the TUNZE, but you can see that it doesn't float. So, and also it's a little bit on the thick side. So for that job, you can use the float, the nano flipper float. So you can see this one can get anywhere you want, and you have this metal blade. And then finally, this is the Waterbox, which is a little bit on the thick side of things, but look at that. So, and it's definitely wider on the inside, but it gets the job done quite nicely. So I think all of them are suitable. I actually like this Mag-Float a lot because it's wide and it cleans, but also I won't be able to fit it in between the rack and the glass. Same goes for the Waterbox. It can fit in, but it's a little bit wider. But both flippers easily are gonna go in, no problem. So if you need extra space, maybe the flipper is easier. And then really tight spots, the nano, but this one is pretty weak even for this glass. So unless you have something small like a 20-gallon aquarium, I don't think I'd be using this or this. But on smaller to medium, all three are pretty nice. Alright, let's wrap things up by sharing my final thoughts and conclusions on all of the magnets. So we've tried 3 different aquariums, 3 different thicknesses, and we've tried all of them in action. So I'm gonna share my thoughts, and I judge or give the score to all of them based on several criteria. They are thickness of the magnet inside of the aquarium. So this, I think, is very important because it allows you to get a little bit into tougher, so narrower spaces. I actually have quite a few of them in my different aquariums. So basically everything to the corner, everything where your coral is going to grow closer to the glass. I think that's when it's important. When it's a brand new aquarium, it's less important, but this is something that matters a lot to me. You also will hear about the glide. So this is how easy it is to glide something and how good of a mark does it leave in terms of the actual cleaning. The corners and sides. So how well does it actually clean when we get closer to the edge or to the corner? So some of them are better than others. The scratch potential. So as I said before, you have the sand, you have some pieces of sand getting stuck here, and all it takes is just one movement, and then you've just ruined your pristine glass, which obviously is going to bug everybody. Tough algae. So this is how well it takes care of those stubborn spots, whether it's coralline algae or whether it's just the green algae that gets stuck in some pieces of glass, which probably are not that even. So that's a problem. And then finally, the feel and look. So whether you're going for the premium look, how well it's going to complement your system. And obviously this is subjective. And then finally, I'm going to give out the score for all of those aquariums. So starting with Waterbox, there's 2 models. There is the large and medium. And with these ones, I think it's rather thick on the inside, so doesn't give you as much maneuverability. and that's why I'm giving it a 1. So I'm giving a score from 1 to 3. 1 is being the lowest, 3 is being the highest. So the glide action, I think it's also right now more of a 1. Glide action is a 2, so it could be a little bit better. I'm getting a little bit of jaggedness here, and overall it's rather smooth, but maybe not as smooth as, for example, the flipper. The corners and sides, I think it does an excellent job. As long as you don't get that stubborn algae to grow, you can actually get in very nicely, and I feel very comfortable pushing closer to the silicone with this plastic tip. So that's definitely a 3 in my book. The scratch potential, I think with any design where it's just 2 big pieces of surfaces, as long as you're careful with the sand, you probably should be okay. However, this could be a problem. Now, I must say that I do have a scratch in this brand new aquarium already. And the funny thing, well, not so funny, but I did get it when I actually had bare bottom. So if you go back a few months or a couple of months ago, I actually didn't have any sand, and yet I managed to get a scratch, and it was actually not on the Waterbox, it was actually on the flipper. So while the common wisdom tells you that, you know, this is how I'm judging it, I just want to say that you can easily, unfortunately, scratch your glass even if it's bare bottom, and if you are super careful not keeping this inside of your water, which I never do, and yet somehow it happens. So I don't know why. Next is going to be regular algae, so basically how well it actually cleans, and I think this one cleans very well. So all it takes is just one brush and it leaves a spotless job, so I'm giving it a 3. You have tough algae, so these are the ones we're talking about. I don't think with this plastic you can get much done against even, you know, stubborn algae. So basically I don't think I'm able to do anything there, so I'm giving it a 1. And then finally, feel and look. Well, this is as premium as you can get. This is real wood. It feels expensive. It feels good in the hand. I think it complements the look, the premium look. If you have the, you know, all the awesome gear, you have the Waterbox, definitely you get the points for that. So I wish somebody would come out with some sort of a thick padding instead of these unsightly tissues, so I can actually put the pieces together. But anyways, that's my thoughts on the Waterbox. Now, one thing I'm not judging any of the magnets on is how well it floats, just because the TUNZE that I have doesn't float, but I know that they have the new one that floats, so I assume all of them float. The next one is flipper, and with the flipper I have a lot of them. I have had almost every model of the flipper since they came out. I've always bought this with my own money, and we can have, you know, this Flipper Max, which is a monstrosity. It's huge. Don't use it on anything smaller than 3/4 inch. And you have the newer model, the Max Flipper Float, and you have the smaller models, the Float in the medium and the regular one, which I have somewhere here, and then you have the small one, the Nano. So excellent magnet, probably one of my favorites. I've used it on all of my aquariums for a very long time, and I will give, so the reason I like it, and this is the first criteria, is the thickness inside. Just look at how thin this is. So this allows me to really get in quite nicely. So this really allows me to get in quite nicely between the glass and the rock or coral. So I'm giving it a 3. The glide is phenomenal. I like the glide on the original one, but the float one, just find that it just glides like butter, as Steve Jobs would say. The corners and sides, because we have some metal here, and yes, they also make the adjustment for acrylic, but this thing is super nice. You can get to the corners, you're not gonna hurt it. but I find it's just not strong enough to get rid of maybe tougher algae when it comes to that. So I'm giving it a 2. So in terms of the scratch potential, I think this design gives you very little surface area contact because of the blade, and those two pads are the only things that are touching. So technically you should minimize the risks of scratching your glass. Now, I did manage with this particular model scratch my glass in a bare bottom tank, so I don't know how that happened. It happened, but I'm still giving it a 3. Then how well does it do on regular algae? It does phenomenal. Basically easy path, everything is nice and clean. However, I did find that sometimes I have to run it more than once, where else with a few others, the TUNZE and the Waterbox, I don't. So I'm giving it a 2 on the regular algae. The tough algae, I'm actually giving it a 1. So even though you have this nice blade, I find that really tough algae, I'm not talking just coralline, but the green algae or something pretty tough, I'm not able to get in with this blade, so I'm actually giving it a 1. And the feel and look, well, I do like the look of it. It may be not as premium as the Waterbox, you don't have the fancy wood, but you still get 3 from me. So that is Flipper. Moving on to TUNZE. So I wish I had the new one. I think the reason I didn't get the new one is because of these pieces coming out on me. So basically I find over long term this was bugging me a lot, and that's one of the reasons I stopped using it so frequently. Maybe they fixed it in the new version, but to me this is a bit of a deal breaker. Look, all it takes is just a little push and then this blue part comes out. So that's just not cool. But it gets the job done, and it's still very nice. Magnet is strong. There's different versions of it, so you can also use acrylic and magnet. The thickness is rather medium, so I'm giving it a 2. I do find that I can get in some places, so maneuverability is pretty cool, but it's still not a 3. The glide is excellent on this thing, so it's nice and smooth. I love it. The corners and sides, pretty good job. Doesn't really get into some of the corner parts, I find, because over here the blade is a lot narrower than the sides. So I'm giving it a 2 because it compensates by getting to the edges very nicely. The scratch potential, well, technically there's nothing that can touch the glass here other than the blade and the other blade, so to me that's a 3. So excellent job. The regular algae is just phenomenal on this one, and the tough algae is a 2, just because I find that you sometimes really need to be careful there and run a few times at different angles. And then the feel and look, well, like I said, because of those things coming out on me and readjustment and just a little bit flimsiness, I'm giving it a 1. So that's your TUNZE. And now we're wrapping up this review with this trusty Mag-Float. I've had this particular guy with me for probably 15 years, maybe more, maybe 20. I did upgrade it when this attachment have come out. I think they have a new design now, but I really love this old school way with the blade. Like, it's just, there's nothing like a true blade on a glass, in my opinion, when it comes to tough algae. So let's run it through the checklist. So in thickness side, well, that's easily a 1. Look like how thick this is on the inside. So definitely doesn't get any points from me. The glide overall is okay, but just okay. So I'm giving it a 2. The corners and sides are pretty awesome. It does sometimes not get into the corners as well, but more importantly, because this is sharp blade, I'm always worried about cutting into silicone. So that's why I'm giving it a 2. It's a balance of the risk and the reward. The scratch potential on this one is quite high. It's the same design as, say, Waterbox, so I'm giving it the same score of 1. The regular algae, I find it doesn't do as good of a job. It requires a few passes, but when it comes to tough algae, there's nothing as good as this. This gets rid of all. It's pretty much the same as taking the blade and going in and using my hand with the blade on the glass. So it's excellent. I highly recommend it from that perspective. And finally, the feel and look, well, yeah, I'm giving it a 1. This is pretty dated, and I think there's much better looking magnets out there, so you don't get any points from that perspective. So this wraps up my review of the magnets. But Dimitri, some of you will say, you forgot this awesome brand called Algae Free. They have this range of premium products with really awesome names like Hammerhead. I do have it. And I absolutely love it. I was one of the first people that got it when it was available in Canada, but I don't use it to for my glass. I actually use it as a pretty cool rack that sometimes I use for photography or just for corals in general. So it's super strong magnet, super strong magnet. You have to be very careful with this one, but I find that because there's no blade attachment, I don't like I cannot get to the corners with this thing. So kudos to the company for coming out with like the first model that had this premium feel of real wood. I like it. Super thick on the inside as well. So I definitely would not throw it out, but I use it for other purposes. So this wraps up our video. I'll tell you what I use and what I would use on all of my aquariums. I would say if we look at the list and the rating, there's almost like 2 categories. There's the Waterbox and the Flipper that are kind of on one side. They are more versatile, get things done kind of thing. And then the TUNZE and the Mag-Float are a little bit more utilized. So if you're going for corners or tough algae, probably those are the things to consider. So what I do and what I would do is use 2 different magnets. So I pick a combo. So for example, my combo can be the Flipper, and then I will use the Mag-Float to clean up and get into those tough spots. So either that, or you can, for example, use Waterbox and then pair it with TUNZE. I think that would also be pretty awesome. I don't think there is one magnet that does it all. Unfortunately, and maybe there is still a potential there to get there, but for me there's no one magnet, so there is always a bit of a trade-off. And then obviously there's also the back wall and how hard it is to get to that. So a lot of times I would just use my hand and a blade to get after those tough spots, but I would say for 80% of what I use my magnets for, I'd go either for the Flipper, that would be my #1 choice, or the Waterbox. It's a beautiful premium product, so I'd like to use it as well. And then for those tough spots, so 10%, I'd use Mag-Float or TUNZE. And I can't wait to try out the new TUNZE, so maybe that's something that I can review in the future. And more importantly, let me know what you think worked for you. Tell me and the viewers what combination or how do you solve those problems. I'm really curious. I'm always eager to up my game when it comes to the spotless tank. This is what I'm going for the ease of use. So I read all of your comments and I really appreciate the community. So with that said, thank you for watching and see you next week.